So this is a package specialization subgroup meeting on the 3rd of April. I will share, we don't actually have anything on the agenda at the moment.
That's cool. We can do it faster and go back to coding. And
Yeah, correct. So, I mean, so there is a number of things what we can do. One is to go through the, but so Bella, is that, did we now agree to do like a joint call to go through the scrubbing of the items or not? Probably not really agreed. I mean, there was mentioned at some point to do it all together.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, we can take it. We can take it, but I have a feeling probably to do it in each subgroup may be a little bit useful as well, in the sense that if you want to go into the details, if you want to go into the details, but in the release meeting, what we could do is, if at all there are any interdependencies, for example, our one of the first stories in our group here, right? If you see, one of the stories is the implement Edge Watcher gRPC server. That is I think it's Stephen and Arvind, I guess. I'm not sure whether they are in this meeting. Probably we can ask them the status there in that that call.
Yeah, the problem they have is that the 8 o'clock for them doesn't really work. That's their problem.
Right, yeah.
So now, to be honest, I am not sure that this is part of sprint 1, to be honest. So I was going to ask them about that actually today, to see whether they believe, because I mean, we have discussed a little bit the architecture on how to make it work and stuff like that, but there is lots of stuff involved. So I'm wondering whether they can even do it in that time frame.
Okay, that's fine. If it is not, we can move it to the next sprint. Yeah,
that's my view is my personal opinion, it should not be part of sprint 1. That's my personal view, but they should probably say that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So one general comment I had before we go to status or anything, I think this particular group, I mean, especially Vim is on a tear. I mean, there's so much code that's been pushed. Thank you so much for everyone for pushing either code or design documents. There are a lot of PRs. So I would request everyone, including myself here, actually to take time and go look at the PR. And provide the review comments. 2 reasons. One is that's going to me, I'm using it as a great educational means as well, as I reviewed quite a few PRs, mainly from Vim, to learn about the system. And also, it will also help balance out the PR velocity, I would say. For example, if it takes time to review, we learn. At the same time, we provide comments to the original author, and the author will take time to go back and fix them. And then eventually we are going to we will be in a position to merge the code. And otherwise, there'll be only new PRs coming in. It's a lot of backlog. Instead of that, if you take the time to review the code, so that's just a good hygiene. So I request all of us to do that. That's one thing I wanted to say.
Can we go through the list of those PRs?
Since if you go, the one good thing, this particular board, if you go to the PR request in the Nepio project.
So there is at the moment, there is 2 repos where we have PRs.
Yeah.
There is the
Nepio, yeah. Nepio has main list of PRs. Yeah.
This is the one. Now we try to combine them in a sense that they only focus on this particular topic, right? So the challenge that we have right now is some of these are libraries. Now, some of these are also libraries because the source objects do not expose some of the interfaces. So for example, in kept file, to add conditions, to do lifecycle management on the conditions, does not exist in the cap on the cap file. So now I did two things. I created an issue on the kept repo to add that there, but we have a problem that in the meaning, if we don't do it right now ourselves, so we have to repeat all of that work. So we decided to create a library for the time being. Once the kept library has that embedded, we can obsolete that thing. But so if so far, yeah, there is a dependency there, and that's true with other libraries like NAD and stuff like that. So there is two types of resources that we consume. One is resources that we control ourselves. So there we have less problems, or we have less dependencies. There is resources that we are depending on let's call it the source repo, that does not expose, they expose the raw material, but for each of these functions to implement it again and again and again, it's a lot of overhead. So we created a bit of an abstraction to make it easier for these functions to interact with it. So that's one thing. So that's, for example, what you see. So this one, for example, is doing that. It helps us to add, let's say, methods on top of the cap file. And the main thing it's doing is it's all the conditional dance. Plus, we also need a naming convention for these conditions. So that's also in there. So what we are trying to do, or what we have been doing, so at this stage is we have, and by the way, that is split amongst a number of people. So there is Ganesh and Saurabh, there is Akash who's on the call, and there is Isti. So it's actually split between a set of people. We have, so that's what we are basically doing. So implementing the, let's say, adjacent libraries. And then what we also did is we created an overall design on how these functions and controllers work together. And it led us to, so what we saw when we were designing it, we actually found a pattern that these functions have that is reusable. So we created also, this is actually fairly recent or fairly new. So we created a function runtime that makes it easier for these functions to consume the thing, because they, so there is a pattern actually that you see in there that they follow. And by abstracting that pattern away and only have these functions implement the relevant pieces, makes those function creation even simpler than they were already. So that's the other thing. So that is actually in this library. There's also an explanation or a design philosophy that is behind, which is actually this document. So there is this design MD, which basically explains the whole philosophy around it. And so, yeah, so what is, I think, nice with this approach is that creating these functions, we always do it in the same way, and we just expose enough of what they have to implement. And as such, I created a prototype for the first one, for the interface injector, so the interface function. But you see that the NAD function is doing exactly the same thing. Of course, it works with his data rather than with the interface data, but the pattern is exactly the same. And so what we did so far is we created this abstraction layer in between, that all the, let's say, the interaction with the cap file and all of that stuff is hidden from these functions in the meantime. So in other words, it's completely, hidden away. Again, here we can debate whether this should be Nephew or this should become part of kept eventually. So we'll discuss that. But at least for us, it will benefit us ourselves, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel for each of these functions, because they always do the same. And there is two sets of functions. There is at the moment, and for the lack of a better name, but I think Akash, you gave the ID, right? So we have an upstream function And a downstream function, an upstream function is when you start the choreography or the conditional dance, as we call it. And the downstream function is when is the ones that are finalizing it. So and by splitting those two, you can actually find the patterns with them. So we created a library, which is actually this one that you just see right now that does that. And I try to describe the philosophy behind and made the analogy towards what the controller today does and how we create the same capabilities, but through this conditional dance or choreography, as some people call it. Yeah. Hey, Akash. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Vim. So we have discussed on this, and we have in the team also we have read through the entire code. I mean, it was amazing actually. It really eases the work of what mutator function or basically the function is going to do, because a lot of the work is done by the runtime. But I have there's a philosophical problem with having a different runtime upstream and downstream. See, the problem is that when we are thinking about an interface function, we use the libraries of upstream function.
Yeah.
So that means that something should be present, which should be implementing the downstream function runtime. So that means we are kind of adding a dependency with these functions. And the problem is the KPT functions does not allow such kind of like a dependency management or something like that. That it says that, okay, the function 1 should be present and function 2 should be present together, But we are by saying that this is an upstream function, that then obviously we assume that there is going to be a downstream function.
Yeah.
The problem is that, as I said, that the dependency we are somewhat philosophically adding, or maybe the design of the libraries is adding it. It is making our job easier, but at the same time, shouldn't it not assume that? This is just a question theoretically. You can.
Yeah, I see your point now. Yeah. So the challenge is always the condition is actually our dependency, right? So we express our dependency through a condition. So that means that if you express a condition one way or another, is you assume that the other guy on which you set the condition is doing that job. That's kind of the implicit assumption of what we did in what we are doing in specialization. And that's basically the meaning of an upstream and a downstream function, is that the upstream is condition free, if you will, and the downstream is condition based, right? That's kind of how they work, but that's also the way that that specialization works. So as such, we have that implicit dependency through that condition. And as a result, you're assuming that the downstream guy that is acting on the condition has to be there. Otherwise, the dance will not, cannot complete. You see? So it's an implicit assumption of that philosophy.
But the sad thing is that KPT function does not allow such a. It allows it, but it does not say something like a dependency management, or it does not say that, okay, this function.
That's true, yeah. And so we added that capability, basically. So we already did that in the One Summit, right? And it's actually also how, if you look to certain, let's say, functions in Kubernetes operate, they use the same philosophy.
Yeah.
Right? So there is also people who are actually building independent controllers that act on a condition, right? And if that relevant piece is not there, okay, then this whole thing will not work, right?
Makes sense, correct.
But we basically adopted the philosophy of some of the controllers that do similar things, and we use it now. The difference here is that here we completely decoupled it, right? So in other words, all these functions are independent, so there is no relationship. That is when you develop a function, you don't necessarily say that, because, for example, the IP allocation has a dependency between, actually, if you look to our design, towards the interface and the NAD, right? But the interface function has no clue whether it's an NAD or whether it's an interface. So it just acts upon something, right? And so for me, it's also, I understand let's say, your question, but on the other hand, I also believe it's the beauty, because now we can create anyone can create an IP allocation request, and it will be acted upon. But of course, the designer of the kept of the package actually has to take into account that all of the things that are setting a condition have to be present to be acted upon. That's like an implicit assumption of the philosophy that we have here. Yeah. Because there's multiple ways to handle dependencies, right? One is you basically build the graph and you try to let's say detail it all out. Here we actually don't build a graph necessarily, we build this implicitly. So we basically say, I want something to happen based on my logic. And then you're assuming that the guy that is acting upon that will be present to be able to fulfill that thing. That's kind of a little bit, so it's a loosely coupled dependency management that we have.
That's perfectly good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Bala.
Hey, thanks, Wim, and thanks, Akash, for the discussion. So I had not, Wim had not reached this PR yet today. Today I'll take a look at this one. Thank you. So I have one immediate question without reading the whole thing. With the naming, you mentioned upstream and downstream functions. Since those have some semantic meanings, upstream and downstream, I'm just wondering why that name was chosen. Obviously, naming is very hard, I believe that. Or should we? I'm just thinking, would that be a bit confusing because it has some semantics associated with this whole?
Yeah, I see. I'm not good in namings, as I said before. So if there is a better suggestion, so the naming actually came from a discussion with Akash.
Yeah.
And that's why I took it from there actually.
Yeah.
So, but upstream means it's the beginning and downstream is the end at the end of the day. So you could, but yeah, that's kind of the way, the distinction between the two. I also try to describe the differences between them. So in this section, so this should actually give you some explanation. So in hope, I'm all for suggesting other names if there is better suggestions.
Cool. Thank you so much. Then I'll take a look at this, read it up, and then probably if I suggest something, I will do that. Thanks.
By the way, not all tests are in this repo, but I think the philosophy behind is important to review, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Fish.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know Akash actually has some questions. Akash, just a request. I think if you're reviewing the PR and if you're able to like make those comments there, that'll be good for the sake of everybody to follow on the PR, right? So that since there are multiple PRs, not everything can be absorbed here, but putting in the PR will be great. And getting Wim's response there in the PR will also be appreciated.
Yeah, correct. And we can write it down. It's a good suggestion. Vish.
Yeah, because these comments, if it's on a particular PR, if it is where we are discussing it here, if it can also get reflected in the PR, that will be awesome. Yeah. For somebody who even joins the project later and looks at these comments, it will be very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, I'll do that. Sure.
So yeah, so if we want to go, so yeah, I just jumped on this one because I think this is an important one for us actually. So the ones for me, the important one actually this one, but it came. So this was a result of us doing a work of an implementation of this function, right? So this code is, I actually know this code is checked in, but it's actually commented out because the code is depending on a bunch of libraries. But if you look at, so if, I know it's a different, where is I developing it? It's package examples right here. So here we actually have, no, it's here, right? Downstream, upstream. See, this is actually the implementation that we have when using the function runtime. So what you see, what you have to do is you have to define. So we kind of, I modeled this a little bit after a controller. Yeah, Vish, you have a question?
No, actually, I didn't lower my hand.
Okay, yeah. So we kind of modeled this a little bit after the controller runtime philosophy. Right? So you always, so in the controller runtime, you have a for object, an owns object, and a watch object, right? So we kind of followed that philosophy. So what you do for a for is that you can only have one for. So you basically say this is the group version kind that you have, and you basically provide a function that you use to actually handle that thing. Then you have owns, which are, in the case of upstream, they represent child resources that you're going to create as a result of that for object. Right? So in the case of interface, the for object is the interface. In the case of own, so these are the child resources that we create based on that interface. For this function, we generate network attachment definitions, we generate IP allocations, VLAN allocations, and NF deployment. Actually, these are conditions, so you can indicate whether you need a condition or you are going to generate a full CR. Okay. A watch is actually a resource that you are depending upon. So in this context, this is the cluster context. So in other words, if the cluster context is not in the package, there should not be any child object created, right? And if they exist, we will delete them, right? Because they are depending on that interface. So they are a derivative of it, right? And then you have, so this is actually giving you context. And then you have a conditional function that you can use or implement to basically tell whether or not what to act upon it. So in this example, it uses the watch as an implementation to basically say to implement the condition. And then in that function, what you do is you basically provide these functions that you act upon. So this is the cluster context callback. So basically it parses the cluster context. It sees whether the data is there and it stores that into its context. And then you, if it's existing, you basically, the populate function acts upon that. So that's kind of what this watch thing does. And then populate interface is actually what is happening if this object comes. And so the function runtime takes care of the diffing and all of that stuff. So it actually takes care of that. So it will give you some information, but the populate interface function is basically telling the function runtime, these are the resources that I would create if nothing would have existed. So if I would start from scratch, that's what I would get or give you. So you see here, if the CNI type is present, so we have some logic. So this is where a lot of where you have some logic. But if the CNI type is present, we generate an IP allocation with certain information, and we generate an NAD with certain information. And if there is no CNI type, it's going to be a loopback interface. So we generate a different IP allocation and no NAD, right? Okay. So you see, so that's actually the only thing you have to implement. And a similar pattern is there for NAD. So we have all these patterns. So I don't know whether you agree or not, but you see that the logic that you have to build or implement for these functions is quite simple. And the function runtime takes care about setting the conditions, doing the diffing, all of that stuff is completely abstracted away from the function.
Yeah, that's definitely useful.
Yeah.
And very helpful. And from the
our target was by Friday to implement our first function, basically, right? Which is actually, this is an example. I actually also created a downstream one, which is this. So you see, it's a similar thing. Yeah, Tal?
Yeah, this is interesting, and I'm not going to object to it at this point, but I feel that, you know, in a lot of our pull requests, we're pushing in really
a data transfer application called FluentBit that allows you to send the JSON objects and stuff like that. That goes
somebody,
and this you can have more than one of these.
I think somebody has to mute Tina.
Okay, yeah, yes.
Yeah. So we're pushing in some of these pull requests really major design, and I understand that it's necessary, right? Because we haven't had a really good master plan for Nefio, right? So a lot of these are gaps that need to be filled, right? The issue with the conditions and now the issue with NADs. I just want to express my worry that we're doing them in these, you know, specific sub projects where not everybody is involved. And I know you wrote a design document too as part of it, which I think is great. But I have the sense that we're putting these facts on the ground with major design issues as part of PRs, and the community as a whole is not really involved in this. But, you know, this NAD issue, of course, you know, it's a big topic. A lot of us are very interested in it, and they're not in the room here right now because they didn't think that this would be the place where we would be managing NADs, right? So I'm not saying don't do what you're doing, because I think you need to get results. But I just want us all to be aware of that, you know, we're setting facts on the ground, and we need to involve the community more generally in design.
See, what we are doing here, Tal, is nothing new, right? So so generating the NDDs and specialization is known by, has been discussed in various forums and is known by various people. What we are discussing is how we are doing it in package specialization right now. And that's the role of package specialization. The generation of the NAD in shift left has always been set, and in all the design documents that we have, not just the ones here, but look at the CRD document, it has it explicitly stated there. If you look to Aravin's document, it's also there. So let's not say that we are not discussing the pieces here. What we are discussing is how we are doing it in specialization.
Right, but it's the how that's important, right? Because it's creating a library and an SDK, because there's a general idea in Nefio that we need an SDK, right, to assist things. So the SDK is being constructed here in an emergent way.
I would not say that we are generating a Nefio SDK. We are creating an SDK for function specialization. In the shift left.
Okay, well that's right now, that's probably the most important part of Nefio. So
okay, but okay, I mean,
I'm not saying that you don't do
everybody
this.
can. So Tal, I mean, I don't know what you suggest, but everybody can come here. These things are recorded. We know that we wanted to do the subgroup split, especially to be able to make progress. If people want to contribute, they can contribute, right? So this should not be a surprise what we are doing here.
I think it might be a surprise to some people who.
Okay.
Okay, but I'll you know, part of our role, each of us, is try to coordinate between the different sub projects. So I'll try to make sure that they at least know that this conversation is going on here, so that they can be involved too. So
and if they have,
again, I'm not saying don't do this, right?
Yeah, so if people have I want to have a look at the PR, they can always do, right?
You know what, I do have a suggestion maybe that can make this work more smoothly, that any PRs that have to do with design, let's review them in the general SIG automation meeting so that everybody involved can know, and it's not in a specific sub-project, right?
But so all the functions have a design, right? So this is not specific to just one. This is.
I tend to agree. I think anything design should be done together, right? The actual implementation, you know, I understood our division into sub projects to be in terms of getting faster with the implementation, but we don't want to lose the general narrative that we're all working together, right?
No, sure. And so we will discuss that, not a problem, right? But we have to make progress, right? We cannot wait for all of, we have tried to do that and we have not made so much progress. What you see with the split of the subgroups, we are finally making progress to each of these things. And I think that's a good thing, right?
I think it's a good thing, but I do think there has to be a balance between progress and also coordinating. So, you know, our SIG automation meetings have been pretty empty. We had no agenda to them because everything had moved to the sub-project. So we can turn them into coordinating meeting where like every sub-project really shows its designs. It doesn't have to go into implementation, but I think the design documents can be easily consumed in that meeting.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, yes, true. I mean, that's one of the, sorry, Vish, if I just wanted to add to Charles' thing. I know you raised your hand too. So I think, yeah, to Wim's point, the PRs are there. I'm actually glad in the way that it's done through a PR, because everybody gets a chance to review it, comment on it, and then change it if the need be. And then we could also discuss, like Tal said, in the SIG automation thing. The one other thing I was going to suggest was, from a PR perspective, I was gonna write up something for the SIG release meeting in their agenda. For so from a PR perspective, for what are the different things we could do? I have a feeling that when a PR is raised, obviously assigning interested parties in the PR process itself is good, but at the same time, if you can put that in the Slack channel, the main Slack channel, not the sub ones, such as SIG automation or SIG release, that we have put this PR, this is about this, please review, something like that. That means everybody's the author is letting everybody know that it's there for consumption, for review, for education, so that everyone can chip in there. That, I mean, that may also alleviate some of the concerns that you have raised. Or if the PR is not ready for review, I understand sometimes PR is not ready for review. Still we need to push it for collaboration purposes, because multiple people may be working on that, and they may want to collaborate on that through review comments and stuff like that. Then we can make it a draft PR. So I'm gonna put up, I'm gonna write some notes for the SIG release meetings, but I think the points that Tal has raised, it can be solved. But I like the way it's been done through the PR process.
Yeah. See, the challenge that we have with too many all coordination is we have tried that, but we didn't make progress, right? So in the meantime, we are making progress. That doesn't mean that we don't have to do coordination, but we have to find the balance somehow.
Exactly, it's about balance. I think it's somewhere in between. Look, open source is slow by its nature because of this coordination. I mean, let's be really honest. Many of us, we're experienced enough. We could probably write all of Nefio on our own 10 times or 100 times faster than the whole community does, right? You know, you sit and write the code and you don't have to coordinate. Coordination adds tremendous overhead, but that's also the value of open source community, right? The mutual ownership by the community over it. So it's a balance that we have to take. So I'm just reminding us not to run too far in the other side of the balance. That's it.
For sure. Yeah. Now, one of the reasons I did this, by the way, is I implemented, I think, all the functions during the POC, right? And what you see is that there is a lot of code that is basically duplicated, and it's all over the place. So it's something that is not good in general. Even if you want to maintain it, it's not a good thing. So the reason why we spent quite a bit of time last week to figure this out is, by doing this, that means that all the function, the only thing that is specific to a function is actually what you see here. All the rest is common, which is actually for
exactly
open source,
my point. Yeah,
which is for open source a very good thing, because it means that
it is. Of course it is.
Very small. Yeah.
But my point is that once you create a shared library, the idea is that everybody should share it, right? Because nobody in the future should duplicate this as well. So then it becomes something that's really owned by everybody, and I think that design needs to be.
Oh no, wait. You have to be careful, right? What you're saying, shared by everyone. We are talking about package specialization of the functions that are acting upon the specialization. If we come up with a design at some point that no longer needs it, okay, this library will not be used. If we have other functions in specialization that would use a similar philosophy, they would use the runtime. That's the idea. But it doesn't mean that everyone from now on has to use this runtime for anything in Nefio. That's not what we are doing here.
Well, sure, but if anybody needs to create NADs, you know, if somebody's creating
even NAD creation, if you go shift right, I'm not saying that this is the right.
I mean, within shift left, there might be another NAD injector other than IPAM, right? So
Well, and this, by the way, IPAM is not injecting it at all here. It's actually the interface that does it.
Okay, right.
It's not even the interface. It's actually the interface says that we need it, and the actual creation is the NED function itself. So I think my suggestion is, before you make these comments, try to understand what we are doing first, because I think some of the statements you're making are incorrect. Because the NED generation is the NED function. The only thing that the interface does is saying that we need an NED.
I do understand that, right? I understand it was decoupled, right, in the design. But my point is that if anybody in the future does something related to NED creation, we won't duplicate it. We will try to use this code that's exactly there. So it's just setting on the ground a design that's going to be core to Nefio. That's my point.
Not only NEDs, it's for anything, right? So for example, we are generating net NF deploy things. It follows the same philosophy. It's not specific to NEDs. It's specific to what we are doing in specialization. That's why we have upstream and downstream functions, and depending on what type you are, you operate on that. But the data on which you operate, you have full control over. How we operate on it and how to do the diffing and generating the dependency objects and stuff like that is hidden away from the function. If tomorrow someone says,
again, it could be all great, you know. I'm just pointing out that the
Yeah,
community.
but my suggestion is have a look into the PR and put your comments over there. I think it's probably more beneficial at this stage. Yeah, Vish.
Oh, well, I think what I wanted to say was mostly discuss among the three of you. But in general, I think, yes, we want to make sure that before a PR gets merged, at least it has got like some, after listening to this discussion, at least some 3 or 4 people have taken a look so that they can add others to the PR saying that, hey, this might be something you want to look at, you know, they can pull in other people. That's a general solution to solve this, at least initially, until we get to a mature process.
That's why we generated the PRs in the first place, right? That's
yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm only saying that let's not be like what I said last week to John about a single looks good to me merging the PR. I think it won't happen. But just saying that
at the moment, I think we decided at least 2 people. And by the way, this one is not even ready to be merged, but because this one, but I think the philosophy behind this one is an important one.
Yeah.
So this just got this was finished on Friday evening, by the way. So that's when I put it in. Also, the design document was actually Friday night or very late. I put it together because I believe the philosophy that's behind should be understood and documented. So this is actually fresh from the press. So this is,
I understand, yeah.
And we are still debating within the small team to actually see what to do.
Correct. I'm just reiterating whatever we have discussed in the past, that's all. So because what that will do is if Tal looks at it, the PR, and he thinks he needs to involve a bunch of other people, he'll probably CC them on that PR. That way, at least.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And that's the whole idea of doing it this way, I think.
That's it.
Hi, Wim. Just one question. I was trying to go to the Nefio.
Don't mind. Liam has raised his hand.
Sorry. Oh, God.
Yeah, I've been waiting patiently here for a while.
Yeah,
I have to admit that I don't have the benefit of being involved in the POC code, right? So I have to admit to be struggling a bit, to be honest now. It's just making, you know, like we go from the high level, I've been running back through the recordings, just to see how everything fits together. I know we're trying to go fast. I'm reluctant to, you know, don't want to slow anything down or the projects, you know, slow down the progress of the project. But I maybe it's just me, but I think anyone coming into this fresh, say on this R1, it's going to be tricky to keep up. And you say, well, that, you know, that's tough. Maybe you should just keep up. But I think maybe there's a little bit of what Tal is saying, that you know, just to know how the whole pieces fit together, and especially this week when it gets to the code. Okay, I can review the code as a block of code, and you know, look at things like the usual stuff like the indentation or, you know, when functions shouldn't be functions. But to actually see how the whole thing fits together, I know what Nefio's, you know, the principles of the thing, but actually going down and really understanding this design is something that maybe I know that is the link for the design document there, or did I miss it, or was it or maybe it's something that we should go back over again or whatever.
Yeah, so first of all, I think two comment or maybe one comment here. Actually, Aravind, so I've been working with Aravind which created the document. Actually in the CRD document, I explained a little bit, but not to the same extent. Aravind took it to the next level. So in automation on Wednesday last week, we went to the package management subsection. We stopped at that point, right?
Yeah, I was listening with great attention to that. Yeah,
yeah, so that document has a next section which we did not review yet, but we will do on Wednesday, I believe, which actually explains package specialization, probably not to the level that you see here, but it actually explains we are 4 functions, right? What I wanted to avoid is that, see, what I did in the POC, right? Because I had basically 1.5 days to implement the function. I just took the fastest way to get them done, right? So what I ended up having is I had a bunch of code that was duplicated all over the place, right? So, and I was very unhappy with it, but I said, okay, that was the only thing that I could do. So what we decided to do in this sub-project is, and this was also a request from John, is try to find a pattern that we can reuse such that we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time, right? This is basically what we did. Now, that's the implementation side of things. What needs to happen is in Aravind's document, and I actually worked with him quite a bit. There's also examples actually of what the input is and what the next output is. Also in the PowerPoint slide that we reviewed in the sub-project, we kind of, do you remember that I said, okay, do you remember this document, this library here? Wait, not this one here, where we went through all of this. So this is actually what we are now implementing.
Oh, yeah.
So this is basically explaining exactly what we are doing here.
Yeah, but
now we are looking at implementation.
But always the problem with this is like when you have a picture like this and then you go to the code, it's bringing, it's making that linkage is always a tricky part when you're designing software. And I think maybe that's.
So look at this function, Liam, right? We said gather info, cluster context is actually our watch, right? And so what we are actually doing here, you saw it, VLAN allocation, IP allocation, NAD, right? This is what you see in this code right now. This code is exactly explaining what's in the PowerPoint. So I think we have done that. Now, of course, we are going, so there is a certain speed that we are acting upon because we are working towards a sprint. But I mean, this is actually documenting all the steps that are taken into interface, into specialization, and each of the functions, what they are doing and how they should operate, right? So that's our initial design. What we are working towards right now is, one is, we have gone through this again with a set of people and implementation, and then we found the patterns and stuff like that. So in order to make reusable code, right? But what has to be done in specialization is documented in this slide set, and then Aravind put, I worked with Aravind to document that in his overall document. So these are 2 sources of information that are there to explain what is happening.
Yeah. Okay.
And the code is a result of this, so we are not doing anything new. The function runtime is a new thing because we saw that there is a pattern in these functions that helps us to make reusable code. So that's basically what that is. But what the function should do is actually here as well for each of them.
So somebody reviewing the PR can always make a request for, hey, reference documents, right? And this could be added.
But what we are doing, by the way, Visha, at the moment is we are, these documents is for us a guideline, right? So what we are doing right now is each of these functions will have a design MD file, as well as the function runtime has a design MD file. So that's where the final documentation is going to be there, right? That's what we agreed in automation to actually the actual designs of what needs to happen is in the design, is in an MD file. And that's how we are working. So there will be 4 MD files for each of the functions. And then there is this function runtime MD design document, because this is what helps us to make this reusable and building a library of code that goes together. So there will be, for us, we are going to generate 5 MD files.
Okay. As part of the same PR for each of those
Oh,
functions.
so each of them, so there is each function has its own design document. So what you see here, so there will be one for interface, there will be one for NED, there will be one for NF deploy, right? So each of them will have its own. You see?
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Ravi, please go.
Yeah, sorry.
No. I was just the one that you showed for package. That's something that you have not checked. That's not part of R1. That was purely for tutorial reasons, right?
See what we were doing, right? We were going through the design like here, right? And we tried to find a pattern in it, okay? And so the first implementation of interface had actually everything that was in the function runtime and everything that was in what you see here, right? So we had multiple iterations. Actually, this is the first, so this is actually an example of the same function if you don't have function runtime. That's kind of what this is, okay? So you see, this is 300 lines of code, right? And this is, what is it? 80.
Okay, yeah. So when it's a function runtime, it's basically using all the libraries that you have created, the abstraction that you create. Okay.
And a more abstracted. So the first thing with this implementation, and so the reason we did that was, so within the team itself, we were looking at this, right, and said, okay, what has to happen, and so we have been iterating through it. And that's how we found the pattern, because if you don't iterate, if you don't implement, it's very hard. Or at least I'm a practical person, so it's hard to find such a pattern, right? So what we said is, okay, our target was by the end of last week to implement the function, right? So this we had actually on Thursday morning. And then I said, okay, guys, we actually have a pattern here that we can use, so let's try to build a runtime. So I think on Thursday, I added the first runtime for upstream, right? Because that's where we started upon. But then we saw, okay, we also need something in downstream. The question is, could we reuse that runtime completely or not? And what you see is that there were some differences that led us to do an upstream, that led us to split it in upstream and downstream. At least that's the current view. So they are quite different. And as a result, we created 2 different runtimes. But the result, so this is now an upstream function and this is a downstream function. So this is actually, if this runtime would work, this is how, which function is this? This is the upstream, sorry. So this is the interface. And this is the downstream, this would be the NED, right? So this is how this looks like. But they found, I tried to build the same philosophy with the for, own, and watch, because most people that have a controller understand that logic, right? Although it's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. I tried to put that same, let's say, these same concepts in here so that people could understand it. But the design document explains that a little bit. But of course, what is not in that document is the examples at the moment. But we kind of implemented these examples in order to testify whether the runtime would do the job. And these are tested as well, by the way. So actually, this would actually do our NED generator. And this would do the interface function if we go with the runtime.
And this, I think, is part of what it's in your repo, I guess. It's not.
This one is a repo, which is not Nephew, but of course, if we go to the function runtime, so there is a separate repo.
It's a similar thing.
Yeah, so I can share this repo if you want, but it's kind of for us an experimental repo where we are doing some development in order to testify the philosophy. And once we see that we have something that is relevant, we are creating a PR of that specific subset, because so this thing is huge, right? Libraries. You also want to review this PR.
It's more a sandbox, right?
Yeah, correct. So this is more of our a sandbox, as you mentioned, to testify the principles.
Mhm.
Because without this, it's nice to build these things, but if you don't have practical or real examples on how to use it, it's also meaningless. Or it's, So the concept behind function runtime is tested. I'm not saying that all the corner cases are figured out, right? But the basic principle seems to work.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, definitely. If you can abstract and make it reusable, make the life of other developers easy. That's what we are trying to do here. So it's good.
Yeah, and I think for open source, even more so, right? Because if you build a pattern, the less code we have to maintain at the end of the day, the better, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me, so maybe we were going through the PRs, I think. Wait, sorry, was the one. So the ones that are, for me, the most interesting one, to get feedback upon ASAP is actually this one here. So 49. I can put them in the Slack again. 49, this one, 65.
Okay.
And then actually the new runtime. So these are the three 82. So these are the three most, actually the function runtime is probably the most important one. The others are actually extensions on kept right now to manipulate resource lists and stuff like that. But these three, the sooner we can get a go for those, this will help us make faster progress. The diff library, so to give you some context, we discussed this last time, I think. The diff library is now incorporated in function runtime. So this is hidden, right? So this one becomes obsolete because of that.
So are you going to share this in the SIG automation channel?
Yes, I can do.
Thank you. That'll be great.
So when you're saying that the diff is incorporated inside the runtime now?
Yes, because what you see is that actually that function exists there, so there is no point in having a separate one there, and then
Got it. So can you put a comment on the diff one that not to review that one, please?
I still need to discuss with Ganesh because I didn't have time yet, but that's what I said to the people in the team which are implementing it. But I think he's okay with it, but I just want to explicitly call it out. But so that's my view right now. So it will be incorporated here.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Actually, it is already.
Yeah. So Wim, the upstream that runtime will internally use the diff library, or it is going to be completely removed?
No. It will. The diff is still there, but it's incorporated there. Okay. Because what you see is that the inventory, if you look to downstream, also needs an inventory, but it doesn't need the diffing there. But it needs the similar thing, but it needs something similar. I didn't know that you were on the call.
I just joined 5 minutes late, so you would know this.
I was going to reach out to you.
By the way, I want to thank everyone who put all these PRs and a lot of work. I mean, a lot of code and good unit test coverage, a lot of design documents. Really, thank you guys.
Yes, many thanks. This is great.
So
thanks very much.
That's it. And by the way, Liam, if you have specific questions, I'm happy to help you go through it, right?
No, I didn't see the latest updates to the package specification design document. I was looking at it here. I think I get it a little bit more now. It's really a way rather than it seems to be, that you're building some kind of infrastructure, or you're building something again not a toolkit either, but just some kind of, if you like, base classes, to misuse a Java term, that you can that other people can use then to build their functions. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's actually it's the way you have to look at it. So it's kept native, right? We have this function runtime in between, and then you have the function. So now this doesn't stop you from building a native kept a function directly under kept SDK, right? So you can go straight like that, not a problem. But what you see is that you have to re-implement a bunch of things in these upstream and downstream functions. So what we are trying to do is abstract that away and build, you can call it SDK, I call it abstraction in between to help you assist with that capability.
No, that makes sense. But as Tal said, it might be no harm to just to take a few minutes on the overall meeting and just maybe go
Yeah,
through
we can
this.
discuss it. Yeah. But for example, what I'm trying to see is that typically when nobody has ever read what we are trying to do, it's not easy because we spend a lot of time on it to, like even what Tal was saying is the generation of NAD is with the NAD function, and you could use this or you could use something else. We are not imposing anything here. Right? For release 1, this is what we are suggesting to you.
No, but if you take this approach here, I mean, you cover the, you don't forget to do something that you need to do, because
that's correct. So that's the other thing. Yeah. So it basically we spent quite a little bit of time. So the other thing that is new here compared to the POC that we did is that change handling and lifecycle handling, like there is a change of the package. Now so what you can have, like all of a sudden cluster context disappears, or an interface object has now different parameters, right? What we try to do here is take into account all of these scenarios, whereas during the POC, none of that was thought about. We were happy that we got something running. So what we are trying to do here is also deal with all these lifecycle operations of create, update, delete, and its adjacent things that could happen around you, because there's still humans that can manipulate the package. So we want to ensure that we take care of all these interdependencies and lifecycle operations to no matter what happens, we should always get to the same result. So that's the other new thing that we did compared to the POC is we try to take or design all the lifecycle operations, like you update an interface, you delete an interface, right? So someone says, okay, in this package, I no longer need an interface, or I add 5 new, or I change the content of it. All of that has to be taken into account of, right? So these are all the things that we are doing. And what the function runtime abstracts the function doesn't have to care about all of that. Or the layer that I showed you doesn't see all of that, right? But it happens. So that's the other thing that the function runtime takes care of. It takes care of all that behavior. Okay. We are running out of time. So, yeah. I think by the way, I canceled the Wednesday meetings. I forgot to mention it. So the idea is now to only do Monday and Thursday, 8 a.m. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you. That gives us time to review PRs.
Yes, indeed.
I'm gonna put that note in the channel too. Yeah, let's make it a priority to review the PRs. Thank you so much, Mint team.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Yeah, thanks, Wim. Thanks for maintaining.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.